good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this afternoon's CIW China Seminar Series. I am Dr. Beverly Loke. I'm a senior lecturer in the Department of IR in the College of Asia and Pacific, along with Dr. Xian Wang, who is not here, but maybe joining us online. We are the co-conveners of this particular China Seminar Series, so very warm welcome. Let me start by acknowledging and celebrating the first Australians on whose traditional unceded lands that we meet, learn, and work on today, the Ngunnawal and Ngambri peoples, and to pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. I have a great pleasure today to warmly welcome Dr. Guo Ma, who is an associate professor at the School of International Studies and serves as assistant director of the China Center for Collaborative Study of the South China Sea at Nanjing University. Dr. Ma will speak to us today on a topic that I think is hugely relevant to many of us. And I'm very glad to see some of my students in the room, so great to see you. And so today's topic is on US-China rivalry in the Asia-Pacific under Trump 2.0, China's strategic vision for Australia. Let me just say a few more words about Dr. Ma. So Dr. Ma was previously the Wang Gangwu visiting fellow at the IC's Yusof Ishak Institute in Singapore, and also a British Chevening scholar. Dr. Ma earned his PhD in political science from the Graduate Center, City University of New York in 2014. He is the author of numerous publications. Let me just list a few here. He is the author of Chinese Foreign Policy in Xi Jinping's Era, The Grand Design and Hot Issues, as well as the Belt and Road Initiative, Opportunity and Challenge for China's Neighboring Foreign Policy. And he's also a multiple prolific contributor in multiple journals, as well as in commentaries. His particular research interests, and we'll hear many of them today, include Chinese international relations theory, China's foreign policy, Sino-US relations, public international law, and I'm sure we will touch upon this a lot today, with a particular emphasis on territorial maritime disputes, particularly in the South China Sea. So very warm welcome. Let me just a few words on the format and housekeeping. So Dr. Ma will speak for about 45 to 50 minutes, and that should give us plenty of time for Q&A. I should also add that we're joined online today by the online audience, so when I moderate the Q&A, I'll be fluctuating between the in-person and the online audience. So without further ado,
thank you, Beverly, for giving me these kind of introductions. And also thank CIW for giving me this platform. I'm currently doing a visiting fellowship here, and it's an honor to have this podium. A little bit about my word. Actually, my last name is Ma, right? So, but it can be Bo as well, right? Famous Bo Xilai. But remember this, if I become very famous, I'll be Ma Bo, like Xi Jinping. Yeah, when I'm not that famous, I'll be Bo Ma, so you can call me this way. So the topic here is US-China rivalry in the Asia-Pacific under Trump 2.0. I use the word the Asia-Pacific not to be political correct, you will come to that in a way, but because I want to be consistent with the ANUs, because here we are at the ANU College of Asia and the Pacific, right? So as long as you guys don't change to College of Indo-Pacific, I will still stick with this Asia-Pacific. But there are some reasons for using the Asia-Pacific, particularly for the Chinese government. I'll come to that in a minute. So I will divide my presentation in probably 3 parts. Okay, the first part will talk about generally the Chinese official and the scholars' view on the Indo-Pacific strategy, which has been 8 years since it has been formally launched in 2017. And then I will talk about what Chinese believe, are there any change or unchanged under Trump 2.0, giving his talks and behavior in the past couple of months. And in the end, I want to talk about a little bit of the relevance to Sino-Australian relations, what the Chinese want from Australia under this repower rivalries in the coming days. So first, this is the government official position towards Indo-Pacific, this concept and the strategy. I'm quoting directly from our Prime Minister Wang Yi, because as far as I found, he is the most senior official in China who openly speak about our position in the Indo-Pacific. You won't hear President Xi Jinping or Prime Minister Li Qiang or Li Keqiang spoke about this strategy. I think that's not their jobs. So I'm mainly using this by listing Wang Yi's talk. So I think when the strategy was first laid out in 2017, generally the Chinese government think this is probably a strategic risk, right? Given the pivot during the Obama's eras. By that time, the Chinese still hope that the strategy is not something specifically designed for the China's rise. So it actually says something about hope that it can be peaceful, cooperative, in this component. And then 1 year later, Wang Yi actually came out and said, well, the Quad is really not targeting any country as it has been designed. Some of the US politicians at that time said it's not designed to contain China. So actually, at least the Chinese government stick with that count. But then I think things getting a little bit changed for a bigger environment. You know, what happened in 2020 is the COVID, right? The Western countries become quite hostile towards the Chinese in all fronts. So then for the Indo-Pacific strategy, the Chinese understanding started to change as well. But first, in 2020, Wang Yi called Indo-Pacific strategy as a so-called NATOization of its architecture. So it's mainly emphasized its military natures. But at that time, to be very honest with you, when we heard of this Asia's NATO or NATOization in Asia, we don't really know what it means. Because at that time, it's not really a serious academic concept. I don't know if it is now, but at least now the concept becoming more and more commonly used. And then in 2022, Wang Yi again called the Indo-Pacific strategy as Cold War mentality, and it's just trying to play the Taiwan cards. So clearly it has some containment intention there. So 1 year later, it emphasized this is a repower rivalries, it's a block confrontations. So I think the position hasn't changed much since then. So right now, I will say loud and clear, China viewed Indo-Pacific strategy, particularly the US version, as a direct strategic threat to the Chinese influence and the interest in this region. And then if you look at what scholar article has been said about this, actually I have like 8,000 policy paper coming out later. I also detail what the Chinese academia talk about Indo-Pacific strategy since 2017. So mainly they're talking about these 4 issues. One, they're concerned about security. They do a lot of study on the Quad and later on the AUKUS under the Biden administration. They believe this is the US unilateral security arrangement aiming at containing China's growth, particularly its military capabilities. And then it has something to do with the South China Sea issues. It's infringement of China's sovereignty claim in the South China Sea area. So because the increasing percent of the US military assets in South China Sea actually try to weaken China's maritime claims, right? Because you know what happened in 2016 is that there's this South China Sea arbitration case came out. So US used this as an excuse to challenge China's claim. Previously, the US might not really hold a position regarding the territorial dispute between China and the claimant states, but no longer the case. A third issue the Chinese scholar actually studied quite a lot is ASEAN's position or the role of ASEAN in this Indo-Pacific strategy. So the conclusion came out saying it's definitely trying to making ASEAN country to pick a side, right? It's really undermining the neutrality and unity of ASEAN countries, right? So you have increasingly Philippines follow the US lead, and then you have countries like Cambodia, Laos, probably stand formally with China in one way or the others. And then you have the swing state like Malaysia and Indonesia and Vietnam. So it's definitely Indo-Pacific strategy. It's not a welcome news for the ASEAN country. But although ASEAN maybe think otherwise, right? They came out their own Indo-Pacific concept. The last one is this Chinese scholar also believe is that definitely study something regarding the economic development for China in this region, right? So along with this Indo-Pacific strategy, kind of the concept of de-risk and the decoupling, and you have the Indo-Pacific economic framework, and now you want to relocate the supply chain and build up a new supply chain, excluding China, right? So it also comes with some economic strategy along with the Indo-Pacific ones, right? So that's mainly what the Chinese academia are thinking about the US Indo-Pacific strategy. So I'll come to a little bit of the detail in each of these things. First, I think Quad, this concept has been heavily studied because for China, Quad is something really new for us, right? Because previously, the Chinese get used to this bilateral security arrangement, right? Like the US hub and spoke system in Asia. But then later on, you get used to this multilateral security architecture as ASEAN lead security framework. Right, but then later on, when the US formed this Quad with Australia, Japan, India, and itself, China found, well, this is something interesting. And at that time, I vividly recall Anthony Blinken said, the Chinese is afraid of alliance, right? So we have to bring this kind of alliance into China's doorsteps. So that's the reason why the Chinese get quite panic about what is really is. Right, so the Quad concept has been heavily studied for both the Chinese government and the Chinese academics. Among the country, the Chinese actually scholar focus, besides the US, is really India and Japan, their engagement with the Quad. But there are slightly less academic work on Australia. I try to come to understand why. So it probably has something to do with there are less scholars in China who really understand Australia and who pay much attention to Australia's security concerns, right? And some of them actually couldn't come to Australia any longer. So that will really reduce the existing stocks of the scholars in China. But I think the thing actually changed in the past couple of years. I'll come to that later. So Australia becoming increasingly important for China to study. Maybe also contribute to the fact that Australia later on formed this AUKUS with the US and the UK. Right. So Australia is really in two of the link chain of the Indo-Pacific architecture, right? Quad and also the AUKUS. Now it has successfully drawn Chinese academics' interest. Also, another reason I assume is that because in China, we always consider Australia as the co-pilot of the US, right? So Australia basically participates in all the war the US initiates and join the war, right? So for China, it doesn't come to any surprise. Australia joined all this security architecture the US initiated. But Japan and India is a little bit different. I think before, well, things went back to 10 years ago, China and India China, Indian, China, Japan relation actually was not that bad, right? Particularly with Japan, actually has a very strong economic ties with Japan. But India is relatively also stable in most of the, I would say probably even the first 20 years in the 21st century. It's relatively stable, right? That's probably the reason the Chinese are focused more on India and Japan and their position towards the unilateral security arrangement with the US. Regarding these sovereignties, so the Chinese scholar also examined the US military. Oh, sorry, I totally forgot. Nobody reminds me. Sorry. Yeah. So I'm already here. Yeah, I suppose I should close this one. This is the tragedy of academia, right? Nobody really cares. Okay, so we come to the South China Sea. I think the Chinese scholar have examined really the US build up in the Indo-Pacific and observed significant shift in American defense mindset. Right, there are institutes in China that are really tracking about the ship movement of the US navies day by day, and they came to the conclusion saying the US is really investing a lot in this so-called freedom of navigation operation, the FONOPs. But there are other variety of things like a gray zone operation. Although now the US claim China is really launching this gray zone activities. Right? Chinese do the same to the US. Right? So then it will actually heighten the security risk to China's maritime economy and the sea line of communications. Right? Also, the US wants to maintain its navy and maritime power in the West Pacific by building up and strengthening this so-called island chain. Right? And third is that it will really infringe China's claim in the South China Sea. And it actually asked its ally to do the same, right? And ask ASEAN country to choose sides. Also, it came out this term so-called internationalization of the South China Sea issue. China even today still formally said this is the issue among regional countries. So extraterritorial state like the US, Australia, and you can name a few of them now, not to intervene. Right? But that's no longer the case, I guess. Also, the Chinese regard ASEAN as really the key to resist the Indo-Pacific strategy. Right? China is probably a lone regional superpower, in the words of David Shambo, because it doesn't really have much so-called military alliance with another country except for North Korea. That's mainly from historical tradition. So the Chinese scholar found the ASEAN country actually generally endorse the Indo-Pacific concept, but they focus on inclusiveness, meaning Indo-Pacific should also bring China in, not to exclude China totally. But we have been asked by multiple ASEAN scholars, why can't China endorse ASEAN's version of the Indo-Pacific rather than totally ignore such things? Maybe it's a good idea, I don't know. But still, I think officially you will never say Indo-Pacific in the Chinese document, official document. And any article we publish in Chinese, once we spoke about the Indo-Pacific region, I have to use quotation marks. There's a fundamental misalignment between the Indo-Pacific strategy and ASEAN's strategic interest in hedging between great powers. The Chinese scholar also draw attention to the potential intra-ASEAN fractures resulting from the Indo-Pacific strategy. Right? So we consider ASEAN countries to be friendly with Indo-Pacific concept, and some are quite maybe against it, and some can be persuaded not to use as often as the others. Last is about the relation between the Indo-Pacific Strategy and China's signature project, the BRI initiative. Then the Chinese believe the Indo-Pacific Strategy has increased the cost of economic cooperation with ASEAN countries, because the US and its ally country try to offer the alternative. I think back to a few years ago, the US mentioned something like a blue dots, and later on Indo-Pacific economic framework, or is. So far, I think the Chinese feel a little bit reassured as not much thing really happened. And some senior US politician actually came out and say, it's not really the US government's job to promote economic growth in this region. We have to rely more on the private sectors, but probably that's not what Trump's saying. So the US really pushed for this de-risking or decoupling of global supply chain. That has affect Sino-ASEAN chains of production. Actually, I did a case study of China and ASEAN's EV cooperation. I don't find the US factor play a much important role in affecting China's collaboration with ASEAN countries in terms of EV development. China and ASEAN actually build a quite strong supply chain of the EVs. The US during Biden's administration has some talk with Indonesia and Vietnam to build alternative supply chain, but never really worked out. And given that the current US government is not a big fan of the green economy, so I guess these things will be up in the air. But anyway, when the Chinese scholars study the economic part of the Indo-Pacific, don't come to the conclusion and say this is a severe thing for China. So still, the military and the security aspect of the Indo-Pacific strategy alarm us, but not the others. How about Trump 2.0? I will tell you, the Chinese consensus among the elites and among the officials before Trump became the president, we believe foreign policy is not his priority, right? We believe that he was busy dealing with the domestic issue like the immigration. If that come to foreign relation, maybe tariff is his priorities. Regarding the real foreign policy, we believe it's the Russian-Ukraine war. He has said multiple times he wants to finish the war in 24 hours, and we don't believe that, but then we think maybe at least we can, this issue can drag him on at least for 6 months. But we probably, nobody really think US Canada, US Greenland, Middle East will be the issue he actually simultaneously focus. But to our surprise, we believe after a while, maybe 6 months or 8 months, top a year, Trump will refocus on Indo-Pacific strategy. Because that's his creation in the first term, right? And he is also surrounded by the diplomatic hawks like Rubio and also you can name a few. But then, to our surprise, so far, really, not much serious thing really happened between China and the US in terms of its geopolitical competition in the Indo-Pacific. And someone, like a reporter, asked what the future of the AUKUS will be. Trump even don't really get the idea of what AUKUS is. So he seemed that not pay much attention on these issues. But how about his diplomatic peoples? I know they have plans, but we just don't know when and in what specific area he will focus on. But I will tell you what the Chinese scholars think of his Indo-Pacific, maybe 3.0. He's 2.0. Indo-Pacific strategy is probably 3.0 if there is one. So in Beijing's view, the strategic core object remains to contain China. That hasn't been changed. So Indo-Pacific has again become the central focus of US grand strategy. So far, we haven't really seen that happen, but that's what the Chinese observer believes. Trump 2.0 is giving the strategy a more focus on the military side, but it also comes with some unpredictable characters. So I actually synthesized analyze, including myself, I contribute a few pieces as well. So these are the four themes that Trump 2.0 will do in the Indo-Pacific regarding the IPS. So first is heightened military prioritizations. So a line will be pushed to rearm quickly. We say that the Trump people really want to increase, want its line country, no matter it's in Europe or in Asia, to increase their military spending budget, right? For Australia, I think they give you guys like 3.5% and some say 5%. But it seems that the Australians really resist that concept so far. Also, Trump will focus on the Navy power in West Pacific, more patrols and deterrence. We couldn't imagine that come to at the cost of the Australian AUKUS, right? So Trump wants to do American first and maybe leave more some room for his own rather than giving to somebody else. Also, you give pressure on airlines to boost defense spending, burden shifting to partners. That part, I think the Chinese are correctly anticipated. Second is the transactional alliance politics. So it's he's not really much a fan of multilateralism. So he believes you pay more, then you should do more principles. So cost benefit calculation of alliance is the cornerstone. So he treat alliance as clients, right? So if you want our protection, then you have to pay more burden sharing. We wouldn't imagine that US and India will actually enter to a dispute, but it actually happened. And there are commentary from Wall Street Journal and New York Times that you are actually doing China a favor because, right? You can imagine US and the Indian dispute because of the tariff actually benefit China. But from this perspective, we think that Trump will treat airlines as a client. And Quad and AUKUS is subject to value for US. So if it's not that useful, maybe it will just be discarded or postponed or even abandoned. I think we are right at this moment. Also, the third character is the strategic uncertainty. The US always give very ambiguous security commitments. So the airlines vary, Washington may withdraw or change course. And the Trump is also quite unpredictable in terms of his leadership styles, right? So somebody can actually persuade him to change the course just by having a burger or ice cream with him on Friday night. That's what we've been told regarding this trade policy. So maybe in security policy is similar, but I think the Chinese really haven't figured out who's really influenced him a lot in terms of security policies, or maybe himself. So he likes to do short-term deals. This administration favors tactical bargains over stable strategy, right? So the Chinese noticed when Marcos Jr., the president of Philippines, visited the US, the first sentence is Trump said, "Oh, this is very important for us to have a strong alliance in this region, but content the rights of China, blah blah blah." And then the second sentence he said, "Oh, but we don't really mind if China and Philippines can develop a good relation with each other." So sometimes you feel that he really conflicting himself somehow, and that really is good news for the Chinese observers. Because it will actually confuse your eyelines. Right? Last one. The Chinese still believe there is this persistent bloc confrontations, right? So I told you 5 years ago when I reviewed academic article from a Chinese author, I saw them saying Asian NATO or the NATOization of Asia, or just put a question mark on this concept. I say, oh, this is really groundless, baseless. But since now, even people like Wang Yi started using this phrase. So although I still quite uncertain what it really means from an academic point of view, but I think from the policy people, they start to accept this term. So either that means the NATO will build up an office or a branch in Asia, right? As the French used to suggest that an office in Tokyo, or forming some grouping in this region and make function like NATO later. So while unilateral security arrangement like the Quad and AUKUS being formally put into a security architecture, a permanent one, that has been closely watched by us in the Chinese. So the VARI is the Indo-Pacific strategies aim to institutionalize this confrontation. I think that alarmed the Chinese the most. That partly explains how come since 2023 or even 2024, China, I wouldn't say, well, actually quietly tries to amend relationship with India, with Japan, and with Australia. People in this country feel very much because you have another government since 2022, right? But simultaneously, that's what happened between China's strategy towards Japan and also towards India. So that also prevent this unilateral security arrangement in this region become formally institutionalized. And that would be a big problem for the Chinese in the long term. So the last part, I want to speak a little bit of China's strategic perception of Australia's role in these regions, although I'm not really an expert in this field, but I try my best. I would say the relation between the two countries really getting warmer and warmer since 2022, after a period of freezing, and here you call economic coercions, but in China it's probably called like punishment or pressure towards Australia regarding the position that the previous government had on the COVID, the origin of the COVID and the Xinjiang issues and the South China Sea, a number of them. So the current government, the Albanese government, has shown a pragmatic approach toward China. Focus on the economic cooperation, well, no longer bending for following the US hardline stance, instead seeking greater autonomy in its China policy. That's from the Chinese observer, not from here. As I said, I think a couple of years ago, the Chinese felt, okay, Australia is becoming very important, not by itself, but also because China wants to increase its own influence in the South Pacific, particularly in the island countries. Then you found that you will have a direct interaction with Australia in these areas. So we actually increase our interest in Australia, not just by its own sake, but because China wants to expand its regional influence. So we have been watching. So far, I think we noticed that the US is really pushing Australia to increase its defense spending. First, Haggerty said they were in the Shangri-La dialogue, and immediately the the Arban's government actually fighting back, saying we're not doing that, we'll probably do 2%. And also, since this country has a trade surplus with US has trade surplus with this country, maybe Australia felt very hard to accept that the US want to increase tariff on aluminum, so a number of merchants from this country. That has been watched by the Chinese, looking at the impact. So what China wants from Australia need recover rivalry in these regions. I'm only giving out what the Chinese government and the scholar wish, right? I'm not saying you guys have to follow this. Actually, I don't think you will. I think the Chinese want, well, generally, I feel China is quite satisfied about the current trajectory between the bilateral relations between China and Australia, right? Another example can be China and Canadians' relations getting really bad and didn't really recover from the previous low, but things are quite different with Australia. So the Chinese would like the Australian to award a binary choice. So it's very understandable. Australia will maintain this security alliance with with the US. So because it's very important, right? So I visited a war memorial in Canberra. I found that Australia actually sacrificed more than 100,000 soldiers during the Two World War. Right? So then it actually makes me understand this security bond between the Australia and the US. So I think most of the observers will feel understandable, but they also wish that Australian government can safeguard economic ties with China because we're the largest trading partner for Australia, right? So we want this momentum to continue. We are in a mutual need situation. China needs a lot of raw materials from this part of the country. Regarding disputes, better to deal in a quiet way, right? Prevent escalation of tensions. We understand this is a democracy, so sometimes politicians have to face the voters and face the media and face the opposition parties. But in some issues, for instance, Taiwan or Xinjiang, maybe Australian government can keep a little bit quiet on those issues. So the Chinese feel quite happy when Arban visited China and didn't really say much about human rights and Taiwan issues. Maybe he got a lot of criticism here, but back to China, we feel this is the way the relationship should be managed, but you can't raise any issue in private. The Chinese are fine that Australia become a swing player, not just an advisory. So when we had this poor relations for the 2020 to 2022, we felt policy doesn't really work that much for Australia. No matter you call it economic coercion or economic pressures, doesn't really pay off. So if Australia can keep itself as a swing state in this rivalry between China and US, I think China will be satisfied. In some area, I think China understands it's hard for Australia to have a collaboration, for instance, like a defense or security. But what about some issue like climate change, right? This US government is not big on these issues. How about like green economy? Surprisingly, I found a lot of Chinese EVs in this country. That really surprised me. So what about the collaboration of EVs here? If Canberra fully aligned with US containment, if we go to, well, let's say bring up Taiwan issue and really provoke China and South China Sea, then I think some scholars in China think that China should really do some retaliation again, right? Well, as I said earlier, I don't find that many Chinese experts, Australian experts in China, and some of them couldn't come to this country any longer. So I think that's probably a little bit hard line for them. That's what the Chinese is happy to look at is current warming Australia and China relations. I just list a few things which I probably already said. I think with that being said, that's probably the end of my presentation. Also, I want to make an advertisement. I have another talk in a few days later in IAIA and purely speak about China's multilateral security arrangement with ASEAN countries. I have a paper on this, so if you have an interest, please sign up. I know they charge a $10 fee. I don't understand why, but hopefully they don't charge me. Thank you, Billy.
Great. Thanks so much, Dr. Ma. This gives us plenty of time, about